Hello. I wanted to talk to you tonight a little bit about the scaffolding documents that I have listed for you in the Module 3 folder. The scaffolding documents that are supplied by the Mississippi Department of Education are when it comes to lesson planning, and they're ones that you're going to need to refer to once you start the lesson planning process in this class. And so I wanted to go ahead and introduce them to you in this module before we get into the lesson plans and the text set creation for this class. So the reason why I have Lexile.com up in the Lexile framework for reading is because I wanted to also kind of introduce you to the mentor text that I'm going to be using for my model of the text set that we're going to be starting in Module 4, starting to think about in Module 4, and then start creating over those next couple of weeks, and then have that text set put together so then it guides our lesson planning process for the rest of the semester. So in this class, you are going to be creating a text set and then lesson plans that are either on a science or social studies topic that fits within the science or social studies frameworks from the state of Mississippi, and that also teaches Common Core state standards. And so the text that I'm using is Moonshot, The Flight of Apollo 11 by Brian Floca. This is a picture book that is a fabulous text that introduces students to Apollo 11, and it can be used in either science or social studies depending on how you use the text. So in science, it can be used with talking about space exploration, the moon, NASA. In social studies, so fitting under Earth space science. In social studies, it's a text that can be used in introducing students to historical figures. So Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, John Kennedy, and thinking about the 1960s and introducing students to events and historical figures within that time frame. So this applies to the scaffolding documents because I need to figure out what grade level would be appropriate for Moonshot, for the flight of Apollo 11. And so when I looked this book up and I went to the quick book search on Lexile.com and typed in Moonshot, it brings up the Lexile level. It says that the book is appropriate for ages 7 to 9, and the Lexile is AD 830. So picture books that get an AD, as this says, is adult directed, which means that they're a picture book that needs to be read to a child rather than the child reading them independently, because some picture books that might seem quite easy do have a pretty high Lexile measure and could be difficult read independently by a child. So the adult would want to read this book aloud to the child. So in your text set, the first lesson that you will be crafting, your comprehension lesson will involve a read aloud of your mentor text or part of your mentor text if it's a quite lengthy book. So this book is an AD 830 Lexile level. So the next thing I'm going to look at is where does this fit in regards to the career and college ready range according to the Common Core state standards for ELA. So if we look at the Lexile again, it's an AD 830, we can see that the Lexile 830 falls in 4th grade, it falls in 5th grade. It could even potentially be something that we did towards the tail end of 3rd grade, although 3rd grade goes up to 820, Lexile level, adding in an 830 adult directed text would be appropriate there as well. So this is something that could really fall in the range of 3rd through 5th grade. So I'm now going to go look at my scaffolding documents, and for this class and what I'm wanting to do tonight, I will look at, say, the 5th grade scaffolding document. So the 5th grade scaffolding document for ELA is divided up in the anchor standards for college and career readiness through the Common Core. So you have your anchor standards for reading, your anchor standards for writing, your anchor standards for language, your anchor standards for speaking and listening, and your foundational skills anchor standards. For reading, you have anchor standards within literature and you have anchor standards within informational text. In the document, the first anchor standards that you have are the literature standards. It's the RL standards. Because we are looking at informational text in this class, I'm going to bypass the language or the literature standards, and I'm going to look at the reading for informational text standards. So the CCR.R.1, read closely to determine what the text says explicitly and to make logical inferences from it, cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text, is the anchor standard for reading. It's anchor standard number 1 for the Common Core state standards or the Mississippi College and Career Readiness standards. So this anchor standard is consistent across all of your grade levels. What's different from it is the specific standard underneath that. And for 5th grade, it is, quote, accurately from a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. So one piece of information that's important to remember about the Common Core state standards is that they were built through backwards design, and they were built through a staircase model where the designers of the Common Core state standards looked at what does it mean to be college and career ready. So what do we want our 12th graders to be able to do to be successful in college? And then let's build on that from kindergarten up. So each step where the students go from one grade to the next becomes a little bit more complex, building off of the same anchor standard. So this anchor standard is the same one in literature as it is in informational text. And so for the informational text R151 or RI51 is, quote, accurately from a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences. So this is building on what the students should know from 4th grade and preparing them once they've mastered this standard at the end of the year to then be successful in building on new knowledge in 6th grade with this same standard becoming a little bit more complex. Also remembering with the Common Core state standards, these are standards they should be able to accomplish by the end of the school year. So this is not one standard that you're going to introduce once or twice. You're going to introduce this standard and practice it over and over again throughout the school year so that the students are proficient with this standard by the end of the school year. So what's really nice about this particular scaffolding document is it talks about what the students should know. So what is this prereq knowledge that they need to know that they should have gotten up through the end of 4th grade to now be successful with this 5th grade standard. So that's the purple box that we see here. In the middle with the pink box is the conceptual understanding. So this is what the students should understand through this particular standard. So thinking about when we're teaching this standard to our students, what we want them to understand conceptually. So be able to walk away with this conceptual knowledge. So that authors include key details, which helps readers ask and answer questions. Readers use examples and details to support their inferences. They use textual evidence and background knowledge to make inferences and draw conclusions, and they can synthesize ideas using details and examples in an informational text. And then the orange box is what should the student be able to do? So what is the evidence that they can present to me, and I can think about designing my assessment to ensure that we've met this standard. So having students summarize what the text says, citing evidence and including a relevant quote. Drawing inferences from the text, citing evidence and including a relevant quote. Justifying the choice of a quote and how it supports an explanation, and then being able to paraphrase. So one thing I want you to recognize with this standard as well is that they've broken up the standard into multiple pieces, because we're not going to teach all of this standard in one go-round. We might solely focus in on the idea of quoting accurately from the text and explaining what the text says explicitly, and totally leave that inferencing piece away for now, because it's not something that we are able to accomplish in one lesson. So if you look at what we have the students doing, you're taking a small chunk of that standard because it does have multiple pieces. So this is the informational text example, and you have your 10 standards here. After the informational text, you have the foundational skills, which is the phonics and the phonemic awareness, the fluency. We're not using the foundational standards in our lessons this semester. So you don't need to become very familiar with those. You then have writing, and remember that writing is divided up with argument, informational text writing, and narrative, argument or opinion depending on grade level. So you have your writing standards, and these have multiple pieces to them, like 5.3a, 5.3b, 5.3c, etc. After the writing standards, you have the speaking and listening standards, and then you also have the language standards. So let's get to the speaking and listening, and then the language standards, the L standards. The language standards that you will be looking at in this class that you could use for your vocabulary plan deal with the acquisition of vocabulary. And so if you look at something like L5 4b, determine or clarify the meaning of unknown or multiple meaning words and phrases used by context clues or word parts, or so 5a is using context clues, 5b is teaching about roots and affixes, 5c is talking about using flexible strategies, but looking at the reference materials. So those would be some of the vocabulary standards you could use. You could also use vocabulary standards that you can find in the informational text standards that are under craft and structure. So these scaffolding documents are really helpful for you to help guide your understanding for thinking about what your students should already have an understanding of when they come to you, what we really want them to conceptually understand, and then how we can assess for that conceptual understanding in our instruction. So what I'm wanting you then to do is, once you figured out your placement for ELA, read the scaffolding document, particularly the informational text standards, the writing, the language, the speaking and listening, and then read the text set template and the text set directions and rubric, because we will be starting that text set assignment in much more detail next week in Module 4. And so that will be really helpful for you to go ahead and start reading those materials, as well as looking again at those anchor standards for the Common Core State Standards to help you start conceptualizing some ideas for that assignment. And then I'll be posting some in-depth videos starting in Module 4 about the text set and what this looks like.